Okay, this is one of my favorite discussions because I think it's got a lot of potential to help people in managing the formation and performance of groups. Your book talks about group formation as a process, and indeed I believe that it is. It is not a scientific process. It's not like a rubber stamp. You'll go through these stages exactly, precisely in this way, but there's enough truth to these stages that we can use it to be more effective managers. So the process says that we'll engage in forming, storming, norming, and then be at the highest level of performance called the performing stage, and then adjourning, ending. So assuming that people get together for a specified period of time, they begin on this date and they end on this date, whenever those boundaries are, they don't start performing at maximum level right away because they have to go through the stages of forming, getting to know one another, storming, having conflict over what they're going to do, who's going to do what the output's going to look like, norming, coming to some agreement on those things and settling down to the point at which they're actually at their highest level of performance. Interestingly, though, there is a theory, and it is just a theory, it's not really scientifically the truth, but there's enough element of the truth there that we can use it. It's a model called the punctuated equilibrium model. I don't really know why they named it that, but it doesn't really matter. Punctuated, like a period or a question mark or an exclamation point, equilibrium. And it basically states that groups that are put together for instance, 4 weeks, will get to that stage of performing in about 2 weeks, about 50% through what they perceive the life cycle of their group is. Well, that's a real shame, because what it implies is that if you give a group 4 weeks to complete something, they will be basically spinning their wheels a great deal for the first several weeks, because they'll be engaging in, presumably, forming, storming, and norming, and not getting to the performing stage. If you want the highest level performing group, well, clearly you need to set them off on their way. You need to give them all the information and tools and motivation to get going quickly. Well, let's take a look at what happens in the forming, storming, and norming stages that I'm describing as sort of a waste of time. Clearly, they're not a waste of time. If I'm put in a group with you, it's completely reasonable that I would want to know your name, what department you come from, what your skill set is, what you are good at, what you like, a little bit about you as a person if we're going to be working together. Clearly, as a group, we need to identify what have we been tasked to accomplish. What will that look like? What do the outcomes look like? What is quality in terms of our outcome? We need to decide all that, and that's probably what a very good group that's not given a great deal of managerial guidance would spend some large portion of their task, their 4 weeks doing. So what can we do as a manager? Because it's clear that we need to engage in those processes. We need to know one another and what the group's goal is and everything, but we don't want to take so much time. Well, think about it then. What can you do as a manager? There's a whole lot you can do. Instead of putting 5 people together and saying, here's your task, and here's the outcome, and you have 4 weeks, you can give a lot more information. You can identify in each member of the group what their great strengths are. After all, that's why you selected each of those 5 individuals and put them together as a group, because you've identified those 5 as having the key skills and characteristics that will form a highly effective group. And you're hoping for, just like they are as workers, that there'll be a great deal of synergy and a great success in their group effort. And if that's true for you and that's true for them, then you're on the same page. You want the same thing. You have the same desire for the same outcome. How do you accomplish that? Well, rather than simply letting them get to know one another, you can facilitate that process, and you can do it so super quickly. That's why you do these cheesy little get to know you, breaking the ice exercises. Tell me one thing about yourself, Dean Clevenger. If you could be any animal, what animal would it be and why? And I would say I would be a lion because I'm fierce. And we would all laugh and say, well, seriously though, why would you be a lion? And I'd say, oh, because I'm really tender on the inside, or I don't know, whatever. People would laugh again, but get a little insight into who I am, and it would break the ice. Doesn't really matter how cheesy it is. My goal as a manager is to get people talking and comfortable with one another, because that's part of the early stages of group development. You don't know what the task is as well as I do, because I've given you the task. I'm the manager, after all. You don't know what quality outcomes look like or how they would be measured, but I do. So I can simply clarify that all right up front. Once we get to know one another, then I say, okay, so I put you together here. I've asked you to participate in this group effort, and here's why. First of all, let me introduce Susan. I know that she is going to be she's the chipmunk because she's kind of squirrely. Ha ha ha. Now, I have picked Susan from the accounting department. Susan has 11 years experience in accounts payable, and particularly in the accounts payable software, which is critical in our assignment here, because we will need to develop a module, blah, 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 blah. John, I have handpicked John. John is a world-class engineer, and he has these traits and these skills and these responsibilities in the engineering department, and we're lucky to have him, and he's the second awesome member of our group, and so forth. So I'm clarifying why each member of the group is there. So they don't need to figure that out. I'm explaining it to them. Now, you might wonder, what will this output look like? Well, let me give you an example of another group project that we engaged in and what it looked like. This one is different, but there are similarities. And I can just show you examples of what output looks like. What would quality look like? Well, we test quality in the following ways, and you should build your product, good or service, whatever have you challenged with these quality metrics in mind. This is how we'll test it in the end. So see, I'm taking out of your way, out of your path, I'm clearing your path as a group. You don't need to spend a lot of time getting to know one another, but obviously you will get to know one another as you work together. You don't need to wonder what the output actually is. I've clearly defined that for you. I've opened it to discussion and said, do you have any questions about what your task is or what it will look like? No questions. Come to me if you have any questions. I don't want you to spend any time spinning your wheels. Let me facilitate your success. I've picked you, each of you 5, with your specific skills and aptitudes and talents in mind. I expect you to be a great performing group, and I want to help to facilitate that, so anything I can do. And then finally, in this high-performing group, you create the environment of celebration when they've achieved what they set out to. So often, managers essentially take the credit for what they've tasked their group to do, and credit is due to a manager. I mean, if a manager puts together the right people in the right way and facilitates their success, then a manager did a good job. But a manager's job is not to take credit. And not only is that the humble way to be a manager, I think that most of us agree to, but it steals or it robs the credibility of the group, and it takes away their opportunity to celebrate what they accomplished. A manager should be pointing successes to other people. After all, you're, as a manager, not responsible for actually doing the work. You're responsible for getting the work done through other people. It's very easy to forget that as we want to aggrandize ourselves and promote ourselves and say, look, aren't I achieving such great things in my job as manager? That's really that's for another time in another context. Your employees should be celebrated.